And I want to introduce one of the newest members of the Warner Parks team. Daniel Charlton is our new tree trust coordinator with Friends of Warner Parks. And I'm super excited for Daniel to share his passion and love of trees with you this evening, and also a little bit about the trees in the park and what we are doing to protect and preserve them. So I will turn it over to you, Daniel.
All right. Thank you so much, Vera. Thank you to Warner Park Nature Center for hosting this talk. I really appreciate the chance to get to share with you all. Thank you everyone for being here. I appreciate your time as well. Like Vera said, my name is Daniel Charlton. I'm the Tree Trust Coordinator here at Friends of Warner Park. The Tree Trust is a new program that we've just launched this year. So we're just getting things off the ground, but I'm very excited to share with you some of what we've been working on so far. Usually when I tell people that I'm the Tree Trust Coordinator, they give me this blank stare or they ask me to repeat myself. One woman actually asked me, she misheard and said, "Oh, you're the tree trunk coordinator. So you make sure that all the tree trunks match? You give them like little sweaters or something?" So what I've started telling people instead is that I am responsible for planting trees and taking care of trees here at the park. I've been working here in this position for about 2.5 months now. So I'm brand new, the Tree Trust is brand new, and we're very excited to share with you what we have going on. Let me share my screen with you here and we'll get started. So we're here today to talk about trees. And I want to start by giving you a few reasons why trees are so important to us as humans, why it's so important to us here at the park, and why it's important that we work to maintain our forests. So a lot of people have this idea that because forests have been around for such a long time, they've gotten on so well without human intervention. Why do we need to maintain our forests? Why do our forests need to be managed? Why can't we just let nature take its course and leave our forests to fend for themselves? So we'll talk about that idea and why that's not as good an idea as it might sound. Then I'll get into telling you some about our Tree Trust, this new program we have, some of its history, and what we've been doing, the work we're doing, and how we're trying to preserve and protect our trees here at Warner Parks. And then lastly, I'll tell you a little bit about some of the trees we have here. I'll highlight a few interesting species for you, and I'll let you know where you can go in the park to go and see these trees for yourself and to learn more about them. So first off, why are trees important? And I realize in giving this talk, I'm preaching to the choir a little bit here. If any of you signed up for this talk, I'm sure you already care about trees and you know that trees are important. And I think a lot of us who love trees, we have this strong sentimental attachment. And I've always loved trees and I never needed a reason. I'm not concerned about the benefits they provide, I just love them. But it's important that those of us who care about trees are able to effectively communicate why trees are so important. Because we're really at a crucial juncture for trees here in Nashville right now. The city is growing very quickly. We're getting new people moving here every day, lots of new condos and houses being built to accommodate them, and only limited space to put them all in. So we're losing a lot of trees to development. We're also losing a lot of trees to invasive insects and diseases. We're going to talk about some of those later on. So it's important that we're working to preserve the trees that we already have, and that we also work to replace those trees we're not able to preserve. And it's up to those of us who care about trees to advocate for them. So arguing from sentiment saying we should keep these trees because I love them isn't going to convince policymakers or city planners or developers. But if we can say, hey, there are concrete economic benefits to having more trees around, there are concrete public health and safety benefits to having more trees around, that's the kind of argument that can make a difference for our trees. So one of these concrete benefits that's a big deal for those of us living here in Nashville is trees decrease flood and stormwater damage. This is a picture of downtown Nashville during the 2010 flood. I moved here to Nashville in 2014, so I wasn't living here at the time, but ever since I've moved here, I've been hearing horror stories about this flood, and I'm sure many of you remember and have stories of your own. Just this last March, we had the worst flooding since 2010. A number of people were killed, many more had to be rescued, and there was massive property damage all over the city. So this is something that trees can help prevent. So trees can absorb an incredible amount of water. The USDA estimates that a healthy mature tree can absorb up to 11,000 gallons of water in a single growing season. So that means water that won't become part of a flash flood, won't overflow our riverbanks. Instead, it either gets released into the atmosphere or safely directed downward to the soil and the water table. This one is maybe a little bit more controversial. Trees increase property value. I know probably most of us think that property values are high enough in Nashville right now, but the fact is people are willing to pay more for properties that have healthy, mature trees on them. And this is a solid reason for both developers and homeowners to work to preserve trees and to plant more trees. Trees also reduce energy costs, and they do that by moderating temperatures. So in the summer, trees lower the ambient temperature from 10 to 15 degrees in the area around them. And if you have trees growing around your home, that can translate to a home energy savings of 1/3 to 1/2 of your energy bill. And that's not only true on a small scale in your own home, but that's true on a citywide scale. So trees also reduce what's known as the urban heat island effect. The urban heat island effect basically means it's hotter in downtown areas of cities and developed areas than it is in the areas around them. So you can see this is a temperature map of Davidson County on the right here. Downtown Nashville is where it's the hottest, and then still warm in these outlying areas, these developed areas along these large major roads, and then nice and cool in the surrounding forest. So if we plant more trees and keep more trees in our downtown and developed areas, that translates to cooler temperatures throughout the city, less intense heat waves, and ultimately fewer heat-related health problems and deaths. This one is maybe my personal favorite. This is absolutely amazing to me. Trees have a measurable physiological effect on humans. So trees reduce our heart rate and our stress levels, and they boost our immune system. Our species has a very long evolutionary history with trees. We're used to being around them, and we're more comfortable when we're around them. There was a study that was done in Japan in 2010, where subjects would spend 3 days in the forest, and scientists would track their immune systems for the 30 days after. And it turns out that being around trees gives a boost to our immune system that's still detectable up to 30 days later. Amazingly, we don't even have to be physically near trees for the stress-reducing effects to take place. Just by looking at pictures of trees, it can reduce your heart rate and your stress level. So as we're going through this presentation, if you feel yourself getting more relaxed and calmer, you're welcome. Trees also increase biodiversity, so they provide food and shelter and habitat for a whole variety of organisms. And ultimately, the more types of organisms an ecosystem can support, the healthier it is, and the better it's going to be able to cope with disturbances and recover from disturbances. And lastly, trees can sequester carbon. So this is very important for those of us who are concerned about climate change. Carbon dioxide is one of the primary greenhouse gases that's driving climate change. And trees are able to absorb carbon dioxide from the air. They release the oxygen for us to breathe, and they use the carbon to grow. They store it in their bodies, keep it safely outside the atmosphere. So we hope that this power of trees to sequester carbon is going to be one of the greatest tools that we have ultimately in our efforts to mitigate the effects of climate change. So let's go back to this question of why can't we just leave our forests alone? Why do we need to manage them? And it's because trees and forests are facing a lot of new challenges that are a result of human activity. So these are problems that we have caused for forests, and it's up to us to solve them. So the main one I want to talk about today is invasive species. You may have heard about this concept of invasive species, but a lot of people confuse invasive species with non-native species, and they're actually not the same thing. Most non-native species are actually not invasive. An invasive species is any species living outside of its native range that disrupts the ability of an ecosystem to function. So most species aren't even able to survive outside their native range. And a lot of others are able to survive, but maybe they don't cause many problems. They become part of the local ecosystem. But then there's a small handful of species, plants, animals, fungi, you name it, all kinds of organisms that do cause large problems outside of their native ranges because they're not subject to the same limits that they have in their native ranges. One of the big ones that we're dealing with here in Nashville and here in the United States more broadly is the emerald ash borer. So this is a beetle that comes from Asia and it feeds on ash trees. And in its native range, it's just a minor pest. It feeds on these trees, but it rarely is able to kill them. And that's because the trees in its native range have evolved alongside it, and they have defenses against it. They're used to dealing with this beetle. Now it's here in the United States, and our native ash trees have no defenses against it at all. Our ash trees have a near 100% mortality rate when they become infected with the emerald ash borer. You can see on the right, these are paths that the emerald ash borer chews through the outside of the wood of a tree. It's underneath the bark. So until the infection becomes very severe, it's not really visible. It happens underneath the bark. But when they chew through this wood, it cuts off the ability of the tree to transmit nutrients up and down the trunk and eventually kills the tree. So this is a map of where the emerald ash borer has been confirmed here in the United States. So it started here in Michigan in 2002, and it's gradually spread in this kind of expanding circle outward throughout the Midwest and the Northeast. We estimate that we've lost over 100 million ash trees so far in the US since 2002. And we've done studies in these areas on what happens after these trees die to the human populations. How are people living in these areas affected? And what we found is where these trees are dying, we suddenly see increased human mortality rates, increased levels of heart disease and respiratory diseases, and amazingly, even increases in crime. So it arrived here in Nashville in about 2014, at least that's when we detected that it was here. And we estimate, I've heard varying estimates from 6 to 13% of our tree canopy here in Nashville, we think is ash trees. And here in Warner Parks, we believe it's about 15% of our tree canopy. We haven't started to see large scale dieback of these trees yet, but we know that it's coming. The emerald ash borer is here, these trees are infected, and these trees are going to be dying in the next few years. There is a treatment that's available. It's not a cure. It's a chemical injection that has to be repeated every 2 years for the life of the tree, and it's not inexpensive. So this is something that we just don't have the resources to do on anywhere near the scale that we need it to help these trees. You can also see a few of these spots throughout the map where the emerald ash borer has jumped kind of outside the main range of the infection. And we think those are areas where people have moved infected firewood and the emerald ash borer was able to spread out from there. Another problem that we're starting to see here in the park is called laurel leaf wilt. So emerald ash borer came in 2014, and like I said, we still haven't seen much dieback. We first found laurel leaf wilt here in the park this summer, and we've already started to see some of our trees dying from it. So this is a fungus that's spread by a different invasive beetle, and it's attacking plants in the laurel family. So here in Middle Tennessee, that means our sassafras trees and our spice bushes. So already, like I said, I haven't seen it in the spice bush yet, but we've seen a number of sassafras trees dying from this. Then in addition to our invasive insects, we have a whole variety of invasive plants. First one I want to talk about is bush honeysuckle. And I have some pictures if you're not familiar with bush honeysuckle, but if you want to know what this looks like, you can also take a look out your window or take a walk around your home, because this is a plant that's growing everywhere. This is a widespread problem here in Middle Tennessee. This here is a picture of a lovely looking ornamental bush honeysuckle that's growing right in my apartment complex. It's one of many that we have here. And the problem with these is that they don't just stay where we plant them. Birds eat these berries and they drop the seeds in the forest. And this is the result. This is an area of our park here in Edwin Warner. And you can see there's some taller trees up at the top, and then all this understory, all this denser green, this is invasive bush honeysuckle. So this is a plant that grows very quickly, it forms these dense thickets, and it shades out all the competition. So other plants and new trees aren't able to grow, which means ultimately the forest isn't able to reproduce as long as these plants are here. We had a wonderful volunteer group come out just this last Friday and work in this area. You can see the before and after here. And you can see this is just one of several big piles of bush honeysuckle that we made and piled there. But you can also see some of these smaller spots of green here in the front. These are younger bush honeysuckle that we didn't get yet. So this is a long-term project. We're going to have to keep coming back here and maintaining this, because if we don't, it's going to end up in a few years looking like the before picture again. So this was about a dozen people, several hours of work, and this is just one tiny area of our park. We have 3,200 acres of park, and invasive species are a problem in almost all of them. So this is something we take very seriously. We have a professional crew who's going out and attacking our invasives every day of the week. We also have many volunteer groups that come all the time, like this one, to help with this, but this is a long-term project. Our goal is to go invasive-free by 2027, but it's an incredibly ambitious goal, and we need a lot of help. This is another plant that acts very much like bush honeysuckle. This is Chinese privet. This whole dense mess here is all privet. You can see how dense it grows, and you can just imagine anything trying to grow up underneath there. There's no space, there's no sunlight. And you can also see just how abundantly this thing produces berries. This thing is just loaded with berries. So it's very effective at reproducing and at outcompeting other trees. And then the last invasive plant I want to talk to you about today is called Euonymus, or Wintercreeper. So this is a vine, but it also forms a dense ground cover that keeps new plants from growing. And it's also able to kill trees, to climb trees and kill them. So you see it starts here as a relatively small vine, and as it grows, it becomes thick and enormous. You can barely see this tree on the left behind that thick Euonymus vine. And the tree on the right has been entirely swallowed by it. So I first started learning about this plant when I first came to work here at the park, and I wanted to learn more, so I went home and I Googled it, of course, and this was one of the results that came up. This is from gardeningknowhow.com. Euonymus Wintercreeper, tips on how to plant Wintercreeper vines. And I've highlighted just a few spots here. Wintercreeper is an attractive woody evergreen vine. Numerous varieties are available. If you have a large open area or a place where other plants have failed, try Wintercreeper. So the moral of the story here is, please be careful what you're planting when you're doing your gardening and your landscaping. If you can, please plant natives. We have many beautiful native plants that you can plant in your gardens and your landscaping. But even if you don't want to plant natives, there are so many non-native plants you can plant that won't cause problems and won't become invasive. So please be aware of what you're doing and not contributing to the problem. Oh boy, this is a problem for our trees that I'm quickly becoming personally familiar with. The deer and I are starting to form a little bit of a rivalry. So this slide shows two different types of damage to trees from deer. So on the left, you see this tree has leaves up at the top, no leaves down at the bottom. And if you could see this even closer, they've actually chewed all the branch tips off the end of this tree. So deer love to eat these leaves and the tender young new growth of trees, which keeps the trees from growing. Once I discovered this, I put up this deer fence. I think it's helping. I don't think it keeps the deer out entirely. But hopefully it discourages them enough that they go off looking for an easier meal. This is one of the trees that we planted here in the park last winter. And we want to protect this tree if we can. This tree on the right, this is a young sweet gum tree. And you can see in the middle, it's lost its bark entirely all the way around. This is where a deer came and rubbed its antlers on the tree. So deer in the fall, they grow this velvet on their antlers that becomes incredibly itchy, and they're just compelled to come rub their antlers all over our young trees, which older trees can survive, but younger trees, it often kills them. So somebody asked me the other day, are deer an invasive species? And the answer is no, they're actually native to our area, but they can cause a lot of problems, especially for our trees. And it's not because they're invasive, but it's because we've lost the predators like wolves that used to keep deer populations in check. So we're aware of this problem with deer rubbing their antlers, and anytime we plant a tree, we put a deer guard on it. But even then, sometimes the deer are able to get through. So these are some trees we planted this past winter. We put these deer guards on, and we fastened them with zip ties at the top and at the bottom. But you can see we left the middle open, and the deer were able to get in. So these trees on the left and right got a little bit of damage. They'll probably be okay. This tree in the middle got some significant damage, and we're going to have to wait and see whether this tree ends up pulling through. This is a picture I took the day we went to put in those deer fences. And we parked at the top of the hill. We walked about halfway down, and then here come the deer to check out what we're doing. You can see they're not all that concerned about us being there, and they're making themselves quite at home in the park. And you can also see in this tree in the foreground, this is another example. There's leaves at the top, but at the lower branches where the deer can reach, they've eaten all the ends of those branches off. So those are a few of the problems that are affecting all of our trees. On top of that, we also have trees the problems to our trees that are growing outside of the forest, some unique problems of their own. The main one being human disturbance and intervention. So this is a young tree in our park that was killed by a weed whacker. So anytime we plant a tree, we have to make sure we're very careful and deliberate about marking our trees so people know that they're there and protecting them. And then more broadly, anytime we have trees in a field like this, these trees aren't able to reproduce on their own. So a tree in the forest, they produce thousands and thousands of seeds, and some of those seeds get lucky and land in the right spot and are able to become a seedling and ultimately a full-grown tree. Here in the field, any seedlings are just going to get mowed down. So any trees that we lose here in the field, they're not going to be replaced unless we're very deliberate about replacing them ourselves. So now you know some of what we're up against with our trees. So what are we doing to protect our trees from all these problems that we have? So this year, we just launched our new tree trust program. And I should mention before I get into talking too much about the tree trust that we actually did have a tree trust program in the past that was much more limited in scope than the one that we have now. So it primarily consisted of a commemorative tree program where for a relatively small donation that more or less just covered the cost of the tree, we would plant a tree honoring the donor or someone the donor chose. We would put a commemorative plaque on this tree. And so people use this as a way to honor their loved ones or remember their loved ones, to celebrate birthdays and special occasions, anniversaries, things like that. And for us at the park, it was a way to get the community involved and excited in our tree planting and to help to offset some of the costs of our larger planting efforts. So most of the pictures I have of these trees are relatively recent. This is 3 persimmon trees that we planted in 2014. That's when they were first planted on the left. And then on the right, you see those same trees this year. This is a sycamore tree that we did during that same planting. And this is an American plum tree that we planted near our headquarters back in 2010. But I do have some older photos from the early 90s. And these aren't strictly these commemorative tree trust trees, but these are some of those larger planting efforts I was talking about that the tree trust helped to fund. So this is the Chickering Entrance to Percy Warner Park. We estimate this is about 1990. You can see on the left, there's a line of sugar maples going down, and then on the right, a line of tulip poplars. And then here are those trees today. I just took this picture a few weeks ago, and you can see those trees have grown, they're healthy, and they're thriving. This is a similar planting that we did over by what's now the Nature Center Drive. Back when we planted these, it didn't actually connect with the Nature Center, but we lined the drive on both sides with sugar maples, and you can see today these are huge, thriving trees. So in many ways, the program was very successful, but ultimately we didn't have the funds to continue it. It wasn't able to pay for itself. And so eventually the original tree trust program, it was started in 1992 and it was discontinued in 2016. So for the past 5 years, there haven't really been any large scale planting efforts or any large scale tree care efforts here in the park. So fortunately this year we were able to launch our tree trust program thanks to the generosity of MARIANNE and Charles LEACII. And I've just been calling it the Tree Trust to keep it simple, but to give it its proper name, it's MARIANNE and Charles LEACII Tree Trust. So MARIANNE and Charles are longtime friends of the park. They've been coming to these parks and loving these parks for decades. And they wanted a way to give back to the park and to let other people give back to the park. And they were very concerned about the health of our forest, especially considering some of these problems that we've been talking about earlier. So they established the Tree Trust this year with an inception gift, as well as a commitment to making ongoing annual contributions. And they've challenged others in the community to do the same. So you can now go make a donation to the Tree Trust. All of your money will go directly towards planting trees and taking care of trees here in the park. So our Tree Trust is still in the very early stages. We're just getting things off the ground, getting our plans underway. But so far, 3 main initiatives have come forward. And the first of those is that we have relaunched our commemorative tree program. So you can now go to our website at warnerparks.org. You can make a donation, and just like before, we'll plant a commemorative tree. And we care for these trees until they're well established. So we water them for 3 years. We guarantee the life of the tree for 5 years, and we continue to care for the tree throughout its life. And we put commemorative plaques on all these trees. This at the bottom, this is a number of the different commemorative trees we planted throughout the parks over the years. So one of the first questions we had to answer in relaunching this program is, what happened to all those old tree trust trees? Are they still alive? Who are they for? Do they still have their commemorative plaques? And most importantly, where are they? So this is where I came into the picture. So I first came to work for the park this past winter on our sweat team, which is our seasonal work crew. We were doing a lot of trail maintenance and invasive plant removal and some tree planting. During my time with the sweat team, I heard that there was interest in relaunching the tree trust and that the parks might be looking to hire someone to take care of all these trees. And I thought, that sounds like the absolute dream job. Where do I sign? How do I make sure that I'm the most qualified candidate when they start hiring? So when my time with the sweat team ended, I went and got a job on a tree crew with a tree care company. I worked there for several months. And then ultimately the tree trust was launched, and I was hired in June in a temporary position as the summer tree care specialist. So my main job throughout the summer was to find all these old trees, care for them, and map them out. So these are a few of the maps that I inherited when I became the summer tree care specialist. These are from the mid-90s. You can see they're handwritten. These are two different maps of the same area of the park. They're at quite different scales. And you can see on the left, so there's 3 sugar maples that were planted here. These are memorial trees for 3 different people. So I went looking, trying to find these trees. And I looked all through here. There's a big open field here, no sugar maples. And then back here, there's kind of a scrubby wood that's probably grown up since that time. And I plunged around in that wood for about half an hour looking for sugar maples. I found a lot of sugar maples, but I didn't find anything that looked like it had been deliberately planted there. So I eventually gave up on those trees. And then a few weeks later, I found this other map. And you can see on the left here, this little notation, there's 3 SMs for sugar maples. And then there's a little note that says, Brandon didn't do these. So I don't know who Brandon was, and I don't know what he didn't do. Does that mean he never actually planted these trees? Does that mean they were planted, but he didn't water them, and that's why they're not there anymore? I just don't know. You can see up here, there's a notation, no trees exist, pointing to some of these dots. So a lot of these records are just unclear. They were written on after they were made, and we don't know by whom or when. So one of our big priorities going forward was to make sure we had clear and detailed records of all of our trees. So ultimately, I found about 400 of these commemorative trees that we planted throughout the years. Most of those were from the original tree trust program, but there were also a handful that have been planted since then by various groups throughout the park. And so I mapped these out, and I ended up with 18 pages of digital maps. This is the overview page. And then this is the first page showing the area around the nature center. And you can see I've assigned a unique number to each of these trees. So each of these numbers corresponds to an entry in our database that has all the information we know about these trees, what species they are, who the donor was, who they're for, when they were planted, everything we know about these trees. And so we're keeping both digital and physical copies of all these records now, in hopes that in the future, if someone else ends up taking my job, they're going to have a much easier time finding all these trees than I did. These are a few of the commemorative plaques that you can see didn't hold up too well over the years. So over the summer, we replaced about 75 of these old labels with brand new ones. But unfortunately, the labels that we got weren't that high quality themselves. This is one of the replacement labels, and this is about 6 weeks after I first put it up. You can see on the left here, this appears to be teeth marks, probably squirrel, and the whole label has just shattered. But we've been very fortunate that we had an anonymous donor come forward who wanted to help out with the tree trust and wanted to know how much it would cost to replace all these labels with new high quality durable metal labels. So we got a quote, and our donor generously agreed to pay for it all. So we're in the process of ordering these labels now, and we hope to have them up in the next few months. And then this was another map that I developed over the summer, and I had hoped that this would be up on our website by now. We're still working with our web designers to get this incorporated, but this is an interactive map where anyone will be able to go to our website, look around, click on these different trees and see what trees planted there, who it's for, what the label says, and see a picture of these trees. So any commemorative trees that we're planting going forward are going to be included on this map. So that's our first initiative of our new tree trust program, is this relaunch of the commemorative trees. Our second initiative has been a complete forest assessment that was conducted by the Nature Conservancy in cooperation with F&W Forestry. So this is a map that the Nature Conservancy made. This shows all the forested areas of our park, and you can see they've divided it up into 500 different subplots. So they went and took detailed information on each of these study plots. So we now know what tree species are there, how tall they are, how wide around, how healthy they are, and what invasive plants are present in that area. So this is for us the first step in a long-term forest management plan. We're going to be working with the Nature Conservancy over the long term to figure out exactly what is the best way to manage our forests and keep them healthy. So the Nature Conservancy has been assessing this data and creating these maps. They've just started sharing the results with us, and we're very excited about it. This is one of the preliminary maps they've shared with us. This shows the presence of bush honeysuckle throughout the park, one of those invasive plants I was telling you about earlier. So these areas that have bigger, darker colored dots, those are the areas where we have more bush honeysuckle. So we can now be very strategic in our efforts to eliminate this plant from our parks. And we have maps like this, not just for the bush honeysuckle, for a whole list of invasive species throughout the park. And then lastly, our third initiative, and our immediate focus going forward, is going to be large-scale tree planting. So our goal is to plant 10,000 trees by the year 2027. You keep hearing me say 2027, that marks the 100th year anniversary of our park. So we're trying to go invasive free by 2027 and also trying to plant 10,000 trees by then. This is a very ambitious goal. So this first year is really going to be our test case, where we're trying different methods and see what works best. We're going to start with 1,000 trees this year, but we know that we're going to have to scale up those efforts to get to that 10,000. So we're going to be very careful about how we plant, trying different methods and keeping careful records to see what ultimately works the best for us. So we've selected 8 locations throughout the park that we think are appropriate, where we can plant 100 to 200 trees. Most of these are areas that right now they're mowed, they're open fields, and they're not being used for anything. Nobody's picnicking there. There's no sports going on there. So these are areas that are ripe for reforestation. There's a couple spots as well where there is some forest, but we've already cleared out the invasive plants, and there's a lot of ash tree in the area. We know that those ash are going to be dying in the next few years, and the canopy is going to open. There's going to be a sudden flood of sunlight in those areas. We want to be proactive and make sure that there are native trees in place that can take the place of those ash trees rather than invasive species moving in once the canopy opens. So like I said, we'll experiment with different sizes of trees, different planting methods, different planting densities, and we'll see what's going to be most effective, most cost effective, and best for the forest in the long run, and scale up from there. So it's a very ambitious goal. We're going to need lots of help. So please keep your eye on our website or subscribe to our newsletter. There's going to be lots of volunteer opportunities coming up to help planting these trees. So some of the native trees we have are widely available. Trees like northern red oak, sugar maple, eastern redbud. These are things you can go into pretty much any nursery and buy. But a lot of the trees we have here are more obscure. Some that most people haven't even heard of, like rusty black haw, roughleaf dogwood, pawpaw. So one of our goals over the long term is to establish a native tree nursery so we can help our forest regenerate itself and really preserve the unique character of the park and the forest. So this is something we've done in the past on a small scale. This is a picture of a native tree nursery kept by the old Tree Trust program, but it's something we'd like to do on a much larger scale in the future. We now have detailed information about the trees in our forest, but we have a lot of trees that are growing outside the forest, trees that are growing in fields or along roadsides. So we want to get detailed information on those as well, so we can come up with a management plan for them, because like I told you earlier, those trees aren't able to regenerate. So anytime one of those trees dies, if we're not replanting, we're going to lose those trees. So we really need to be aware of what we have in our park so we can make a long-term management strategy. All right, so I'm going to talk for a little bit about some of the trees that we have here, just highlight a few of the more interesting species, and more importantly, share with you where you can go to see these trees for yourself and learn more about them. So one of the trees that I've been seeing all summer that I first learned about this summer was American Yellowwood. We have a lot of this throughout the park, and a lot of our commemorative trees have been American Yellowwood. But I actually didn't realize until recently how rare this tree is. You can see the range map on the right. It's only growing in a few isolated pockets throughout the United States. So this is a rare, beautiful tree that we have here in our park. This picture on the left is right by the Nature Center in our overflow parking. So you can go see it there or see several others throughout the park. Even more rare than that, we have the Harbison's Hawthorn. So hawthorns are in the rose family. They're a distant cousin of apple trees. And you can see, like roses, they have quite impressive thorns. But the Harbison's hawthorn is a rare and endangered species of hawthorn. And it's one that we're particularly interested in because it was first discovered as a species here in our parks. It's only known to grow in the wild in 2 different counties in Tennessee. That's its whole worldwide range. So it's a tree that we're working to preserve. About a dozen of the commemorative trees we planted throughout the park have been Harbison's hawthorn. And then I should stress, this one has not been confirmed yet, but we've gotten preliminary reports through our forest assessment that we may have butternut growing in our park. Butternut is a close relative of walnut. One of its other names is white walnut. And we live pretty much at the southern end of its range, but it's a tree that's declined throughout its range. It's dying off because of butternut canker. So it's something we're looking into. We're not sure that we have it. We would be absolutely delighted to have it. But I point this out mainly to say there's still a lot that we don't know about our forests, and we're still learning more all the time. So anywhere you go in our park, you're going to see a lot of beautiful and interesting trees. But we have a couple of designated tree trails, and we have some good educational material around these trails. So the first one is called the Meadow Tree Trail. This starts right in front of the Nature Center, and it winds through a meadow along the Nature Center Drive. It's a short, relatively easy walk, and it has a lot of different species in it. We have Yellowwood in here, we have Harbison's Hawthorn in here. This picture is a hornbeam or ironwood tree that's one of my personal favorites on the trail. And we have brochures for this available in the Nature Center and also on the Nature Center website. So I believe Vera is going to post a link to that in the chat. And then 2 of our other tree trails, we had a brochure for these, but unfortunately it's quite out of date. It's no longer available. You can see at the top left, if you're particularly familiar with the park, you might notice the Nature Center actually hasn't been in that spot for over 20 years now. So we're in the process of updating these brochures. We hope to have those available soon. But we do have some information on the Friends of Warner Park website that you can at least find where these trails are. So these are trails where we've marked a variety of different species of trees, and we have them labeled so you can identify them. And the brochure will ultimately have identification tips for the various trees. The old roadway tree trail starts pretty much where the Meadow Tree Trail ends. It's right at the end, the main entrance to Edwin Warner Park. And it's a beautiful paved loop, a lot of picturesque old trees. The Tornado Ridge Tree Trail is a little bit more vigorous. It's partly paved and it's partly on one of our unpaved hiking trails on the Mossy Ridge Trail. And this starts at the Chickering Entrance to Percy Warner Park, which is one of the areas I showed you pictures of earlier. And then the last place I want to tell you about is the Hill Forest. If you like trees and you haven't yet been to the Hill Forest, you absolutely have to go. This is the newest addition to Warner Parks, but it's the oldest forest that we have. And you can see in some of these pictures, you'll notice there's some very large, beautiful trees. But also, as you're looking at these pictures, take a look at the understory and think back to those pictures I showed you of the bush honeysuckle. Notice how clear and open this is, and you'll start to get a sense of what a unique place this is in our park. So this is pristine forest. It's had very little human disturbance, very little invasive plants. So this is an area that we want to work hard to preserve. It's a registered state natural area. We do limit access to it because we want to keep it in this beautiful undisturbed condition. But we do lead hikes out there. We limit them to 15 people per hike. But so it's important that you register in advance. You can find dates on the Nature Center website. You can register through the Nature Center. We have a few coming up in December. I have the dates here. But we also have a few, we'll have several in January and February as well. And then the last thing I want to tell you about, this Saturday at the Nature Center, we're hosting a tree planting demonstration. So from 10 to noon, I'll be there teaching you how to plant trees. If any of you are interested in planting trees on your own property, we're going to have a demonstration on proper tree planting technique. I believe we'll do one at 10 and one at 11. You can drop by at any time. We'll have some information for you that you can take home about how to plant a tree. So with that, that's all I have today. If you have any questions about anything I've said, you can put them in the chat now, but if you want to reach out to me later, I would love to talk to you. If you have any questions about the tree trust, if you're interested in getting a commemorative tree, please reach out to me, dcharlton@warnerparks.org. So thank you very much for your time and attention, and I will open it up to questions.
Thank you, Daniel. And I do want to mention that this program and all of our webinars are a partnership between Metro Parks, Warner Park Nature Center, and Friends of Warner Parks. And if anyone has any questions for Daniel, either put them in the Q&A or the chat. Okay, we have a I've got some raised hands. So I can Pompey. I'm gonna let Doug said thank you for an interesting talk. Okay, so Pompey, I'm gonna let you talk.
I was just wondering if you had a favorite tree identification book that you like.
I don't know that I would call it a favorite, but I can show you the one that I mainly use. Actually, I'll show you two, the easier one and the harder one. So the basic one I use is from the National Audubon Society, Field Guide to Trees in the Eastern region. This has lots of good pictures and lots of information. But I also use, specific to our region, the Woody Plants of Tennessee and Kentucky. This is a much more technical book with much fewer pictures. So if you're just getting started learning about a few of these trees, I wouldn't recommend this one, but as you get more advanced and you're trying to tell the difference between some of these trickier species, oak species and hickory species, this is a great book by Ronald Jones and Eugene Wofford.
Thank you.
And Paul is asking some questions about ashes. So we have 3 species of ash in the park: blue, green, and white. Blue is the least common. Do you want to answer the question about the blue ash, Daniel?
I'm not too familiar with it. My understanding is that it's smaller and it grows close to water banks and it's more rare. That's about all I can tell you about it. I don't know if Björn knows more.
I think it has squarish stems, and it tends to be a smaller species, and it is quite uncommon in Warner. I think it's a little bit more common on the Highland Rim, but yeah, you would probably want to look in a field guide to see the distinguishing characteristics between blue and the other ashes. I think white is our most prevalent ash species in the park.
I've also heard that the blue is slightly more resistant to the emerald ash borer, like maybe 98% fatality rate instead of 100. So, you know, we may be seeing more of it than the other ash trees.
American chestnuts are being brought back. Do you have some insights?
I'm not up on the latest with this. I know that they've been working on some hybrids, like 15th, 16th American chestnuts with, I don't know if it's Chinese chestnut or what they've hybridized. I know we planted some in the park a few years back. They haven't done very well. I'd heard that this initial strain wasn't too successful and that they were kind of going back to the drawing board and trying something new. I haven't heard the results of those newer chestnuts.
Does the emerald ash borer affect other species besides ash?
To my knowledge, no. I think they're quite they're specialists. I've never heard of them attacking anything besides ash.
So there is a tree that's not in Warner Park, but it is a Tennessee tree called the fringe tree. And there has been some evidence that they attack fringe tree as well.
Interesting.
Yeah. Any other questions for folks? From folks? All right. Well, thank you, Daniel, for your presentation.
You're
Feel free
welcome.
to reach out to Daniel. His email is available, and you can always contact the Nature Center to follow up on the program. Again, this will be recorded or it has been recorded. And if you want to learn more about tree planting, please come out to the tree planting demonstration on Saturday and look for our Hill Forest hikes coming up in December and on the winter schedule in January and February. Thank you all so much for attending tonight, and have a great rest of your evening.
Thanks a lot. Bye.